The Committee of the Whole is in order. Senator Atta, you're recognized on Bill 223.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I would like to first open by setting the stage for the discussion and getting everybody oriented for the discussion that we're having this afternoon. And it's on Bill 223-34, as amended by the Committee on Environment, Land, Agriculture, and Procurement Reform. And it is an act to consolidate and rezone Lot 50101 new, 5042-1, and Lot 5042-R1 in the municipality of Dedido from R2 to M1 light industrial zone, and to allow for the construction and operation of a new power generation plant on behalf of the Guam Power Authority. So what I would like to start off with, everybody should have a packet of about 8 pages, which is marked on the lower right-hand corner as exhibits. And the first exhibits that I would like to point to is where is this proposed site of these 3 lots that are to be rezoned. And so you'll see in Exhibit 1 the 3 lots, Lot 5042-R1, 5010 new, and 5042-1, where those 3 contiguous lots are located. Directly to the south of that is the GPA power substation. And to the southwest of that, you'll see that kind of a yellowish area. That's where GRMC is located. We have a larger map up here that shows, gives a better view of the second map up here shows, gives a blown up view of this area orientation. On Exhibit 2, it shows pretty much actually the same, gives the same depiction. It shows where marked off in blue, right in the middle of that graphic, and those are where the lots are that's to be rezoned, and that's where the power plant is proposed to be built. Up almost due north of that is located the Guam Water Works Northern Water Wastewater Treatment Plant. South of that blue area that's marked off shows the Harmon substation. Again, this is just another depiction of the area that we're talking about. Almost to the southwest of that blue area that's marked off, that you see that little white rectangular area, that's the GRMC. That's Exhibit 2. Now, the question about why is that site, the site being proposed, I can we'll let the GPA panel elaborate on that, but basically that is the area that they found to be most economically feasible, and it is also close to the gray water source that, that they need for the power plant. And in addition to that, this particular site would be the closest site that they have identified that will be closest to the load concentration that basically is to be served, and that is Dedido, Jigo, and the military bases up in this area, in addition to Tumon and Tamuning. Now, to the question of what is the impact of rezoning from R2 to M1. Initially, Bill 223 had called to rezone the area from R2 to M2, heavy industrial. However, that rezoning has been changed to M1, and that change is now consistent with the recommendation of the Dedido and the Tamuning Municipal Planning Councils, and also the recommendation of the Department of Land Management. Now, by changing it also to M1, the area that is to be rezoned is now compatible to zones of the surrounding lots, wherein approximately 65% of the surrounding lots are already zoned M1. So you'll see that on Exhibit 3. On Exhibit 3 is a real simple, without the detail, depiction of the zoning pattern. And everything that you see in green is zoned M1. Where it is colored in blue, it is zoned commercial, and then off to the left, where it's colored in brown, that's zoned hotel. In Exhibit 3A, that shows you the zoning pattern with the details, and it shows you where all these M1 lots are. And so actually you could almost say that the lots that do not fit in with the zoning pattern are the 3 lots in question. Those are R2. And so basically the intent here was just to show that the rezoning from R2 to M1 is really compatible with what's available out there already with the zoning pattern. On Exhibit 4, you'll see a graphic that shows some circles drawn around the 3 lots that's to be rezoned. Now, what the law requires is that they provide a notification of the landowners within 500 feet of those lots to be notified. GPA went over and above that, and they went out. So everything within the red circle represents the 500-foot radius, and then, but instead they went out to the 1,000-foot, which is surrounded by the, indicated by the blue circle, and so they've also included those. Now, on the next page, Exhibit 4A is a sample of the landowner mail-out list. And there you'll see the lot number, who the owner is, and who the notification was sent to. In some cases, in a number of cases, it was actually sent out to the law offices that represent these estates. GPA also, in addition to that, did send it out as registered mail and have kept on file the return receipts of these mail-outs. If anybody wants to, now this landowner mail-out list is about 9 pages long, and so if anybody wants to see all 9 pages, I have copies available here and I can make them available. There's the concern that was raised about the notification of landowners in addition to, the mail-outs. The law requires a sign to be posted in a visible area on the lot. GPA posted 3 signs as required, and in a visible area on the lot. So if you'll see on Exhibit 5 and Exhibit 5A, there's a picture of the sign that was posted, and I believe that was posted back in January. On Exhibit 5A is a close-up of that notice to rezone. On Exhibit 5, this sign was posted on the lot, and in front of it is the legal easement for the lots that are in there. In addition to doing mail-outs to the land owners, GPA also conducted hearings in Dedido and in Tamuning, and also with various organizations between the period of July 27, 2017 to February 6, 2018. That's 13 public meetings and also 5 media interviews. And then the notices were published in the print media. The legislature also conducted hearings on Bill 223 in the evening to accommodate the community. So hearing notices for those hearings were published in print media as required by law. Now, during the public hearing, concerns were raised about what might be the impact on the aquifer. So on Exhibit 6, you will see there an overlay of where the GWA water wells are. You'll see them basically almost within the residential areas to the south of the proposed site to be rezoned. And then there's one up on the north there close to where the wastewater treatment plant is. A representative from the University of Guam, Dr. John Jensen, who's with the Water, Energy, and Research Institute, he testified that the GPA facility would not imperil the aquifer. And basically, he said, the location of the plant is about a half a mile away, and any release of materials at the surface would be carried away from the wells rather than towards it. There was also testimony from the Guam Water Works General Manager, Miguel Bedallo, and his statement was that GWA's water production wells would not be adversely impacted. The site itself is located at the outer edge of the northern Guam lens aquifer of the Jigo-Tumon Basin. And the Guam Water Works deep wells providing the highest quality water in the basal and parabasal zones are concentrated well inland and upgradient with respect to groundwater flow of this area. And finally, with regards relative to the impact on the aquifer, the fuel tanks will have to comply with US EPA protection requirements of above ground storage tanks, which requires that fuel storage tanks be contained within a secondary containment berm. The public hearing, at the public hearing, there were concerns that were raised. One concern was that the construction of a facility, they were concerned that about the construction of a facility that will belch contaminants and carbon emissions. And that, I will assert, is untrue. The proposed facility to be built is a facility and likely will have to be in compliance with the clean air regulations and a number of other EPA regulations. Another concern that was raised was that the power plant will create a dangerous environment and will further jeopardize the health of our sick, frail, and elderly at the private hospital and the patrons of our medical complex. That's the GRMC that's located, I believe, about within GRMC, which is located within 1,000 feet of where the power plant will be. And so to that, the GPA did point out that as an example, in Boston, Massachusetts, they have an area, a 60-acre square, where they have the medical area total energy plant that basically services a number of medical facilities. Documentation, in addition to that, documentation exists indicating that in 2000, I believe it was 2008, one of the nearby lots that is zoned M1 already had actually originally intended to build almost adjacent to where GRMC was, intended to build a temporary workforce housing. And if we're talking about creating a dangerous environment, having a temporary workforce housing in that area certainly creates for that. But at any rate, those were some of the concerns raised. Other concerns were they never got, the landowner never got notification of the proposed rezoning. Documentation suggests otherwise, that at least GPA tried its best. So that, Mr. Chairman, I believe sets the stage for the discussion of Bill 223.
Thank you, Senator Munya. And Senator Atta, if you want to assume the chair and control the discussion, you may.
All right.
After Senator Munya, it'll be Senator Nelson. Senator Munya, you recognized.
Actually, I just have a quick question because I didn't know if there was a difference between the copy of the bill that was given to us at the beginning of session or the one that was passed out today. I didn't know if there's a difference. I'm not seeing anything different, but I didn't know if there...
So there is a difference. At the public hearing, what was issued, is that you're asking, Senator?
No. There was a copy that was given to us of all the bills that's on the agenda.
Yeah.
So it's the same?
Same.
Okay.
I'm not sure why a second set was issued out.
Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank the General Manager, Mr. Beneventi, and Ms. Tracy for being here today. I want to commend GPA on the efforts that they've made to reach out to the community. They've held numerous hearings at different senior citizen centers, and they've given the public an opportunity to express their concern, and they've also addressed each and every concern. We also had a public informational hearing and a roundtable to discuss the proposed movement forward to meet the needs of the power demand on Guam for 180 megawatts. So thank you very much for being proactive within our community, and thank you to Senator Atta for the extensive work that he has provided for us. There was just one concern that we had, was that the bid process. And so that's the only concern that was raised it was after our informational hearing. So Mr. Beneventi, could you please speak a little bit about the bid process and how that the rezoning of this property may or may not impact the bid process?
That's great. Thank you, Senator. Thank you very much. The bid process is actually a multi-step invitation for a bid, and it basically consists of three key steps. The first step is the submittal of financial and experience in building power plants. And that step actually part was issued. Actually, all of this has been approved by the Guam PUC. So the first step was issued in January 2016, and 18 proponents, and it was opened on April 5th. 18 proponents submitted their financial and experience, and we're in the process of reviewing that. The whole process in this first step is to review on those that pass the criteria required, which includes, the financial audit, being capable to finance this power plant, build it, showing that they have done work in this type of similar to what we need. There's a short list that will be established, and that short list we're hoping to establish within the next 2 weeks. second step of the process is really where we provide the shortlisted group, the technical specifications, and give them 4 to 6 months to prepare their technical specification and a price proposal. And that will be submitted to GPA, who will put the price proposal and seal, kept sealed and locked, while we review the technical proposal. After review, only those that have met the technical proposal requirement will be invited for the opening of the seal price. Those that didn't make it will get their prices back. So therefore, at the end, it's really, anyone that passes the door really qualifies, and then it's just the price that's going to determine who is the lowest bidder and which is the project that would be that we would venture to contract with. So that is the three-step process. It is a multi-step invitation for bid, unlike the request for proposal, where you can rank the company, choose who they are, then ask for their proposal. And this is really what we try to do, a competitive structure, where we provide them technical specifications, because the power plant has to be constructed to various standards, building codes. Any type of equipment has to have its manufacturers, or there's building code standard or equipment standards, safety standards, all of that. So all of that has to be met in the technical portion, in addition to our other criteria, like it has to be aesthetically opposing, like some of the promises that we have made throughout the process that we've been going. It has to be low noise. It's got to be, noise has to be abated, so the noise level at this point will not be more than this. So different things like that, but again, it's a three-step process. And of course, the next step is really, before issuing the technical specs, we kind of need to have the land that we have, because although although the bid is open for others to bid in, to provide bids which they provide the land or location, there is a substantial number of these bidders that are looking for a land area to construct. And why is that? Because it depends where, putting a power plant takes more than just sticking it here and then tying it into the grid. You have really to evaluate and model all the, one, the environmental emissions. Two, when it gets into the transmission grid, you have to make sure there's redundancies. You have to make sure it carries in all that power plant load capacity has to be sent to all the different areas of the island. So we've done that for the site, and so others have to do something similar. But we're not precluding anyone from submitting anything. It's just that they have to assure us that they can achieve similar standards necessary for the protection of the grid.
Thank you, Mr. Beneventi.
Thank you.
Is that it, Senator? Okay. Speaker?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it's no secret that many of you suffered me this last weekend. And the management and the board of the CCU endured a number of my texts and emails and demands for meetings and discussions about this plant, this proposal. It was no secret that I was very concerned about the location and the property of the proposed site. I've done my research since on my own, and the reason why I was concerned, Mr. Chairman, was because if you look at what the members have as Exhibit 1 and your big map up here, which is Exhibit 3 in your 2 on your, in your list of documents. The area that we're thinking about putting this new plant in is in green, a huge green space. And I want it understood that I am in favor, and I have been pushing CCU to build a new plant because I, like everybody else on island, have suffered considerable number of brownouts, power losses, almost on a weekly basis, and getting texts from people what, I can't even say what they put on the text of what happened to the power. So I'm in favor of the building of a new plant, and I was very happy that the CCU was thinking about it and was moving forward with it. My concern, again, as I said, was the location. And the board suffered me 2 weeks ago where I brought them in and took them through my Google Earth and tried to figure out why here and why not consolidate everything down where the current wastewater treatment plant is and where the expanded wastewater plant is going to be put in. And kept trying to figure out why we were going to do this to this area. And Saturday I drove up and down that road and I kept fearing that this was going to turn into Harmon Industrial Park West. And I didn't want that to happen. Unfortunately, it was this legislature, not this, the 34th. It was the 30th Guam Legislature that approved the zoning that you have in chart number 3, which is up there. It's Exhibit 3 in our packet, but it's up here on this. And it wasn't until I saw this map and I tried to figure out why was all this industrial on this side, M1, mostly actual M2s that were in here. And I did the research and discovered that it was a previous legislature that had approved that. And so we're going to have to live with the fact that all of these people over the last 8 years have, to their detriment, relied on their having property on that side as being industrial, M1 and M2. My concerns about wanting to have a Rodeo Drive as opposed to Hamburger Road was decided by a previous legislature, unfortunately. And though I did not vote for the bill, which eventually became 30-211, I cannot be absolved of the fault because, as the voting sheet will show, I was absent. I was a member of that legislature, and I failed to be there to fight this rezoning when it was before this body. And I invite the members who have their computers at their desk to pull up the 30th Guam Legislature and look at Bill number 453-30, which eventually became 30-211. And in it, the title is very clear, an act to approve the official zoning map, F367S52 on the Dos Amantes planning area, and all related zone amendments. And I think it bears reading into the record, because this is, I'm trying to work myself through, because as the GPA management know, they suffered me for over an hour screaming about despoiling this area. But this was done by legislative action. And it wasn't done willy-nilly, Mr. Chairman. And I will read the legislative finding only to try to confirm to everyone what happened at that time, if you would allow me.
Please proceed.
Okay, the bill was introduced by V.C. Pangilinan, Judy Guthards, and yourself. And the legislative findings reads, Y Legislatura en Guam finds that certain lands formerly held by the federal government have been returned to original landowners in the north of Tumon Bay and west of Route 3, which is generally referred to as Dos Amantes. These returned lands remained unzoned for decades while it was under the ownership of the United States government. These lands were subsequently returned to the government of Guam and in turn transferred to the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission. Pursuant to enabling legislation and mandate, these lands were returned to the original landowners, heirs, and descendants. The properties were returned without zoning designation. Y Legislatura en Guam further finds the Department of Land Management adopted Resolution 2008-01 establishing an interim zoning map and procedures for the Dos Amantes planning area plan. The final plan was presented as official zoning map F367S52 to Imagalahin Guahan on December the 11th, 2009, and it was approved on December the 15th, 2009. The official zoning map was then forwarded to the Speaker of Minat 30 de Legislatura en Guahan. The plan was then transferred to the Chairman of the Committee on Appropriations, Taxation, Banking, Insurance, Retirement, and Land Committee, which held public hearing on March 11, 2010. During the public hearing, original landowners who were in attendance testified on the plan. However, there were some original landowners who were not adequately notified. To further ensure that as many landowners as possible were notified and have an opportunity to respond to the plan, the chairman of the committee found it necessary to contact as many landowners affected by the plan and bring forth their concerns on the zone designation assigned to their properties. It is with great importance to establish a zoning plan for Dos Amantes. By designating zones, property owners can utilize their property in accordance with zoning designation. Therefore, after exhausting all efforts to ensure that all landowners, heirs, and descendants had ample time to provide comments and requests, a change in the zone designation of their property, Y Legislatura en Guahan intends to approve the official zoning map F367S52 and all related zoning amendments. And with that, in section 2, it lists about 16 zoning changes from R2 to C, R2 to M1, R2 to M2. And so, though I was not present when this was discussed on November the 30th of 2010 and eventually passed by the legislature on that date and signed by the governor on December the 13th, I, as a member of that body of that legislature, have to live by the decision that was made by 14 of my colleagues and signed by the governor. And so I have to agree that regardless of how I may want to keep this thing as green as possible. 8 years ago, we zoned all of this property M1, M2, and commercial. And all of these individuals have been living with that as their, one, their tax base, and two, what they were hoping to do with their property on that side. Why you would have an industrial zone across from a hotel zone is beyond me. But that was the way and that was the plan that was approved. And so, though I have my own concerns about using this beautiful green area for an industrial, it was a enactment of the Guam Legislature, be it the 30th, 8 years ago, that did that, and I am bound by the rule of law to accept it, and I accept it, and have no objection to the proposal that you have to designate this to be M1, like the areas around it. Though a lot of the area that is around it is actually M2, so I thank you for at least reducing it to M1. And with that, I just wanted to state my concerns and what I've discovered in my research. And I thank the board for coming to my office several times and bringing the management on very short notice to come in and explain themselves and have suffering my haranguing. But after doing my research, I realized that though it's not estoppel, I think really we are stopped from not granting this zone change because it is in line with all of the areas around it as done by this Guam Legislature in 2010. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Speaker Cruz. Anyone else? Senator San Nicolas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually want to take the opportunity to first express my thanks to the agency and to the overseeing boards and commissions. It's a very tricky thing to do, to try and find a place to put something like this. You got to find where you're not going to impact residents. You got to find where you're not going to impact natural resources. But you also got to find where you're going to have access to the infrastructure necessary for the project to make sense. And when you put all of those factors on the table, the options become very limited. Just in evaluating, and I also want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your presentation. I think it was a classic Tom Atta presentation, very well done, has all the T's crosses and the I's dotted. And in your Exhibit 2A that you provided to us, it very clearly shows that this area is, not only does it check off all those necessary boxes, but it's very ideal in terms of its relativity to the infrastructure necessary for the project to work. It's right in the middle of the cross-section of sewer, water, and access to the Harmon substation. And so from this location, this power plant is able to access all the infrastructure it needs to be able to do the job that it's intended to do. I wanted to just point out one very keen observation, and that is that the proposed location is the closest possible location out of all of the other properties on the map. It's the closest possible location to the Harmon substation. And the proximity to the Harmon substation is very important because, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. General Manager, but the longer the transmission line, the more we degrade the quality of power that we're able to pump into the system.
Correct, Senator. In fact, putting the plant in that location is going to save us about $1.5 million a year in line losses. Because right now, the power plant, we bring all the power from down in Cabarrus up through the mountains, through Agana, all the way up to Harmon where it's utilized. So from here to there, it's about $1.5 million. So over 30 years, that's a substantial amount.
Dramatic amount of money. And so because we have the transmission line from the power plant so close to Harmon substation, if I could also reference, Mr. Chairman, the other map that you provided that shows the density right below the Harmon substation. This is Exhibit 2. Right below the Harmon substation, just across the street, we have the Micronesia Mall. We have all of those residences all throughout Dededo, all the way into the Santa Barbara area, all the way up into the Estumbu area. This is one of our most densely populated areas. And so the demand for power is going to be drawn very, very acutely from this area. And so by minimizing the transmission distance, by putting the plant here, having the transmission line almost immediately feeding into the Harmon substation, and having that high quality power feeding into those lines right into those homes, we're going to reduce brownouts for so many families. We're going to ensure the continuity quality of the power that's being generated, and we're going to benefit tens of thousands of members of our community just by putting this plant in the right place. And just by looking at the map, I mean, I understand green space, but it's really hard to find 59 acres anywhere that's not going to impact green space. And so it just all makes sense to me. And I know that I'm sure a lot of work had to go into making sure that you found a place that was going to almost be a Goldilocks type of location for the power plant. And it looks like we may have found it. I mean, we're not going to probably get everything that we want, but I think this is as close as we can get. So I wanted to issue my congratulations to the authority for a job well done, and to you, Mr. Chairman, for, of course, all of your work that went into making sure that we have all the information necessary to make a decision on this. This decision makes sense to me, just from a quality of, just from the quality aspect of the services that we're going to be able to provide by putting the power plant here. So I wanted to express my support for this project, and once again, thank all the parties very much for all the work that went into this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator San Nicolas. Senator San Augustine?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Benavente, I have no problem putting the power plant where you recommended. I've had discussions with Mr. Duenas and several of the other board members, but my only concern is the last time we met with the GPA folks, one of the major concerns a lot of us asked was that how are the rates? Are the rates going to go up? And then, after that last meeting, Mr. Benavente, the following week, the rates went up. Now you're going to build another power plant, and I'm in support of building the power plant because, Dededo's the heavy populated, and Jigu's growing. It's great to have a power plant nearby. But I'm just concerned as how much is the rates going to go up after you build. It's $400 million, right?
Senator, thank you that's a good question. The promise of the CCU and GPA management is that we're going to construct this power plant and we're going to pay for the debt service and all of that without raising the rates. On the other side of the equation, not raising the base rates, no? On the other side of the equation, constructing this power plant so that it works well with renewables is much more efficient because we're going to have to shut down the cameras 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is burning cheaper fuel today, but it's what they consider dirty fuel. We're going to burn clean, ultra-low sulfur diesel, which is more expensive. However, the new power plant is going to be more efficient, so we're going to consume less volume of oil, and therefore it'll be a parity. But what it's going to allow us to do also is to add more renewables. If you see, we already have in the process of we have the approvals, and we're contracting for 120 megawatts of renewables. That 120 megawatts of renewable could save us anywhere from $9 to $18 million when it comes on the line in 2021. In addition to that, we have a 40 megawatt bid out at on the Navy bases, the land we're leasing for about 160 acres of Navy land. That bid is out, and by this summer, we hope to get to the process of contracting. That's going to catch all the energy that is produced in the daytime, store it in batteries, and then we're going to use it to shave the peak The peak is the most expensive time for us because that's when all the standby generators or peakers come, and they're less efficient, but they're necessary just to meet that peak demand. So the battery system is going to cut that peak, and it's going to also save us money. So the whole combination of this, as noted in part of our presentation, is that by 2021, the new power plant coming on, the renewables coming on, we're going to drop the LEAC portion at least $9 million a year. We're also,
Mr. Benavente, not to interrupt you, but as you identify all these savings, what does it mean to the customer? When you say $9 million, what does it mean to me or even you and your employees?
It's going to drop your rates.
To what? To $1, $2? The only reason why I ask this question, Mr. Benavente, is because until 2021, how many more times are they going to raise the rates, and then we finally find the dip?
Yeah.
That's what I'm concerned about.
Okay.
Because that's 3 years from now, at least.
Yeah. Between now and 2021, I'm at the mercy. We are at the mercy of the world oil market, just like we are at the Mobile gas station and everything. See. So right now, if oil goes up, which it did in 2010, it went up to about $110 a barrel, and the cost to the consumers came out to about 29 cents a kilowatt hour. In 2016, it came down as low as about $30 or $40 a barrel, and the consumers were paying about 18 cents. But since then, it's been creeping up now, and it's about close to $70 a barrel, and that's why we're close to 24 cents. However, this is one of our quests, is really to get away from this uncontrollable rates. And how do we do that? We control it by having this new power plant, which will work with renewables, because right now, this is the way renewables generate power, no matter what anyone says out there. That's why we're putting in all these batteries so we can make it smooth. That's why you're getting some brownouts here and there. But once we put in the new power plant, put in these renewables, and the renewable prices, say, the ones we're awarding, the 120 megawatts, is about an average of 8.5 cents. The LEAC today is 15.2, 8.5 cents, and that goes right to the LEAC. GPA does not see that money. That goes right to the consumer. And that's 8.5 cents with only a 1% escalator. So in 25 years, it only goes to 10 cents. It never sees this. So by 2021, we're going to have 25% of our energy on that type of scenario. And then with the new power plant, we're already looking at this, and perhaps we can have 50% of our energy. And this that guy Benavente is already dreaming about by 2025 or 2028. And again, when I say Benavente, I'm really talking about our GPA team and everyone. They're already looking how we can add more renewables, where we use existing transmission lines, and properties around, they just feed into those existing lines and therefore reduce our costs. So it's really within grasp that we achieve close to 50% renewables, which will now stabilize our rates. On the last step I was heading just before is that LNG is also another factor now. LNG only in past recent years, in just recent years, really has been a commodity that has been coming out to the market. The U.S. is now exporting LNG. So we hope to capture some of that and bring in the LNG to Guam. But first, the power plant is needed first because it's going to burn diesel and LNG. When we bring in LNG, we're going to drop it about $50 million a year in annual costs. So what we're saying here is that really, I was looking at I did make a presentation to the commission just the last board meeting. I think you're looking that around that time we do all of that, we're going to drop our cost somewhere around the 18 cents a kilowatt hour, which is really, when in 2016, when I saw that, when we were at 18, everyone around was really kind of comfortable at that number. It's only when we started to go up again, but 18 seems to be an affordable range for everyone. So that's kind of where we're heading. But all of this is part of that puzzle. No?
Okay. One more question. The military buildup is coming. Are they going to be a big customer for GPA? Because you're near that new base.
The who? The Marine
The
base?
military buildup.
The military awarded a contract to put an underground line from the Harmon substation up to the Marine base in NCS, all the way up to the Anderson Air Force Base. Then they're going to turn the transmission line over to GPA. They will be a customer of GPA. GPA is the only producer on the island, and the Navy is an 18% customer. With the Marines base coming in, that's going to increase. The they bring in somewhere in the neighborhood of about $20 to $40 million a year of revenue to GPA, helping offset all the different costs. So to answer your question, yes, they will continue to be a customer. We continue to work with them with renewables so that we make them happy and maintain them as a customer. As we all know, a few decades ago, it was Navy producing power. We went to a power pool agreement. Then we made them a customer. And it's been at least 15 years now that they've been a happy customer, because I haven't heard otherwise. No?
And I'm going to assume there's been an effort to try to get them to maybe give you additional money, maybe several grants, maybe 10 or $20 million to help you in your build-up then.
Yeah,
Has there been an effort to do that?
Yeah.
I'm just curious if the military is going to contribute, because they're going to be pumping a lot of money into Guam.
Right.
Just wondering if they could pump it into GPA to help you build that plant.
Yep, that transmission lines and everything, they're building it at their cost and then turning it over to us. It's part of the agreement on the One Guam, how we worked it out. And we convinced them to make it underground, because part of the major advantage of this power plant being at the location is that we can run the bases through a storm if they're underground line. So that means we don't lose revenue at all. In addition to that, that area's got all kinds of transmission lines, all the way to the airport, down to Tumon, and we're trying to complete all the laterals in Tumon so that we can also run Tumon all the way up to GMH through a storm. But at the current location of the power plants, there's no way that, but with this, you can see it's just a short distance right to the heart of the system, all through underground lines. So it really brings a major benefit to everyone there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator San Agustin. Senator Rodriguez had questions, but he just stepped out momentarily. Speaker Cruz, can you take?
You're recognized, Senator Adams.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Benavente, this land that is where the power plant is to be constructed, can you elaborate a little bit on the purchase arrangement? Did GPA already purchase it, or is it dependent on something?
The purchase of the land is dependent on the rezoning, and then it's further dependent on the PUC approving approving the contract, because what the CCU already has approved the contract for us, and that's why we're here proceeding with the rezoning. And then PUC has noted to us that they would like to see it rezoned before they take action on it. And I believe they will
on the purchase itself.
On the purchase itself.
So then theoretically, if this bill passes the legislature and the governor signs it into law, then that completes the conditions for the purchase of the land, correct?
One more step is the PUC approving.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Because we couldn't, GPA in itself couldn't purchase without all these different authority. So, but again, it's kind of, we try to do some things concurrently, and then some things had to be done before others. So.
What will PUC be looking for?
That the land is rezoned. I think they have approved for us to construct up in the Okudo area. I believe they see the value of where we're constructing, so I think it's more important that they see that it is, we're purchasing the land, and that it could be used for the purpose we're trying to do so.
Okay.
And other than that, I think I don't see any other reasons why they may not approve it. No.
Okay, so it seems like we got two things going on here. We have the motion to purchase the land. If Bill 223 gets approved, that gives you the green, and PUC concurs, that gives you the green light to purchase the land, right? And then at the same time, you have this bid process going on for somebody to come in and build that power plant.
Sure.
And so let's say just there is that chance that that you may select a bidder who can provide you with what you need at the lowest rates possible, but does not need this land. What then will GPA do with this property?
Well, GPA could save it for some future needs, or probably sell it, try and get someone to buy it from us. It's just that we really can't, it's kind of a, what do you say? What do you say? Before the,
So then let me pose the question differently.
we need the land to be able to design everything that's needed as a preliminary bid for the proponents to bid on the power plant.
That's right. So, I mean, you don't want to do it sequentially and find out who's going to be selected as the new contractor to build the power plant, and then we find out that he needs land, and then we're going to go through that process of purchasing the land and rezoning it. We need to, I guess there's some reasonable degree of certainty that this really is the best choice of where to construct that power plant. Would it be reasonable that if in the event, let's say tomorrow GPA purchases this land, and the day after you award the bid to build a new power plant to a firm that does not need this land, would it be reasonable to put into this bill that if in that event that contractor must purchase this property? Would that be reasonable?
That is reasonable, yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, how is this going to work? What is GPA's involvement in the construction of this power plant? So for discussion purposes, let's say that this new lot is where the power plant is going to be constructed. To what extent is GPA going to be involved in the construction of this power plant and the subsequent operation of the power plant?
This is what we're bidding out is for what they call an independent power producer to construct, operate, and maintain this power plant for the next 25 years with an option for another 5 years. And at the end of that, and we will pay them a capacity fee, a fixed O&M, and a variable cost for burning the fuel. And at the end of the 30 years, turn the power plant over back to GPA, who can then look at the plan and recapitalize it for the next 20 years or so, because already the ratepayers of Guam have paid for similar to like a mortgage for this plan over in 25 years. So therefore, the cost will be reduced for the future generation when you recapitalize. You're going to have to reinvest in the plant to make it reliable for, say, another 20 years, whatever life you want it, but then it will be at a lot less rate. Case in point, the MEC number 9 that's coming over, ownership will be coming over to GPA in 2019. We're dropping about $18 million a year in capacity costs, just because that's what we paid the plant. We've been paying for. It's like the mortgage portion of the bill. Temis 7, we were paying $6 million a year. We took over that plan just last year, so now we're saving $6 million a year. So all of this, again, are savings that are, you know, like we mentioned, a question earlier was how we're going to pay for this from base rates. This is what we're going to utilize to pay for the base rate. So GPA really will be managing this contract. It will be the private partnership, the private entity that will have their employees run the plan and ensure, put their equity in it, and make sure that this plan serves the people of Guam based on the criteria, the performance standards that are put into the bid specs. They must be this reliable, they must be this efficient, and there are penalties if they don't achieve that. And so that's the model. They will finance the project, and again, at the end of 25, 30 years, the power plant will be owned by the ratepayers of Guam.
Thank you. Can you elaborate a little bit about the interface between the wastewater treatment plant and this new power plant that's proposed in that location?
Depending on the type of the technology, and again, we're leaving the technology whether it's a combined cycle or diesel, smaller diesel units up to the proponent. If you use the combined cycle technology, you use close to 3 million gallons a day of water. The Northern Wastewater Treatment Plant at minimum is running around 5 million, close to 6 million gallons of wastewater a day that is being treated and then sent out to the ocean. The plan is to take about $3 million of that and treat it to be potable water, not drinking water, but potable, non-potable water, which is used for, like for irrigation or thing. But we can use that and treat that to use it for cooling the power plant. So that therefore, it makes it a sustainable issue where we're not taking any water from the aquifer. The retirement of Cabras 1 and 2 after the completion of this project is going to save around 35 to 50 million, not dollars, I'm sorry, 35 to 50 million gallons of water a year that we will stop drawing from the current aquifer. So in addition to not using it at all, we're going to be reducing our consumption from the aquifer. So that's why, of course, we're happy for that. US EPA is quite happy because right now, Cabras brings in seawater through condensers, bring some heat and out. And what we're seeing is down the road, there'll be more and more regulations against utilizing seawater for cooling of power plants.
Thank you. My final question, Mr. Chairman, is so how do you assure those who have expressed their concern about this belching, contaminating facility that's going to be built next to the hospital, next to this medical campus and all that? How do you assure the surrounding landowners that that you're not going to be operating a belching, contaminating facility?
What you're going to see in this plan is similar to what's in any power plant, or, for example, what's over a GRMC. GRMC, you have a power plant, you have air-cooled scenarios because they use water from the aquifer actually and cool the generators. and they have storage tank. This power plant will have similar features, it's just at a much bigger scale, but it won't have hazardous materials. It won't have anything that, that's why an M1 zone characteristic seems to fit what we need in that area. So we also plan the purchase of this land is 60 acres. The footprint of the power plant, we're thinking, is within 30 acres. So therefore, there will be a buffer outside of the footprint of the power plant, some as much as 200-300 feet between the edge of the footprint of the new power plant to the edge of the boundary. So we want to be a good neighbor, buffering ourselves throughout this area. The plant will be constructed aesthetically, and concrete buildings abating using abatement for noise and all of that. And again, I think we have some renderings that show that, other than the stack that's up there coming up in the air, which is probably going to be about 150 feet at the most. Other than that, you won't really know that there was a power plant there. That's the commitment we made and that's what we told the public as we went around, and it's certainly doable and will be put into our bid specs.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized. And then Senator Munoz.
Hafide, good afternoon. Thank you very much
Good
for
afternoon.
being here. First of all, I want to commend you as well for a very well put together
Thank you.
plan and presentation that you have before us here. Also recognize Senator Ada and his committee for providing all that they have. Senator Ada did ask one question that I kind of had a concern with, was the issues raised by GRMC and the surrounding the people with property in the surrounding area, and you kind of satisfied my my concern, but I'll ask a little bit more. But it's that's the first concern that I have. The second concern that I have is that I understand this bill is strictly for rezoning. It's not to discuss whether we are in support of the power plant that's being built or not. That's another process that will take its course. However, and I want to ask, so by approving this, let me just go back a little bit. I do agree that we do need a new power plant, and what you are proposing to build is better than what, of course, with technology, better than what we have today. However, there may be other options as well that I'm sure that you've taken a look at, or other options that are on the table. But by approving this, what is the next step in the process of building this new power plant?
By approving this, we're bringing it before the the PUC, to approve the land purchase. Once approved, then we complete our bid specs and we provide the specifications to the bidders. And the bidders, again, the bid allows for others to do, they want to build something else in other locations from here, from what we offer, they can do that. However, again, the basic bid, it will be this land area with this type of power plant, all these conditions put in, and so others can bid similarly to that, so we can have an apple-to-apple comparison. So really the process is such that we're working real hard, that we have a contract in place by about the November or so this year, because we need to complete this power plant no later than December 2021. One, load growth is coming, and there will be some challenges, but I think we'll be fine. But we need to know that 2021, Cabras 1 and 2 is already 43 years old. It'll be 47 by then. We need to know that by 2021 we can lay her to rest and bring the new power plant on, and have more reliability. So by 20, we also, there's another part of this equation that of course we don't say as much, we've just been working towards, is the US EPA requirement for us to be compliant with the rice MAC, for example, for the slow-speed diesel, where we're potentially subjected to penalties today. We provided US EPA a plan in January 2015 that said by December 2020 we will construct power plants and we will retire instead of trying to rehabilitate 20, 40-year-old machines. So we're like 1 year, you know, the process has been tedious, if you will, so we're going to be 1 year behind that, and I think so far it looks like they haven't really said yes, but it looks like it's reasonable for them to approve that. So therefore, we can settle on a consent decree that allows us to complete the power plant, get away from all these penalties, and achieve all the different things I was saying earlier. So yes, once PUC approve, it's a go, the bid process, but the construction won't begin until probably the beginning of 2019.
Okay. All right. I appreciate that. And so in short, there is that other opportunity for the public to review and once again voice if they do have any concern, after the rezoning of this property for the new power plant. So just going back now to the same issue that Senator Ada brought up on the issues raised by the hospital there. And, there's a new medical facility that's being built in the vicinity as well. So besides the buffer that you talked about, the 300 feet buffer between the new power plant and the boundary, what is the distance now from that boundary to the new, to the medical facility? And besides that buffer, what other mitigations can be done to address the issues that they've raised? Thank you.
First answer to that really is that the boundary to boundary is so far, like I mentioned, there's 200, 300 feet. But from GRMC to, say, the stack of this power plant, you're looking at about 1,000 feet or more. 1,000 feet is like from here to Paseo Stadium. 1,000 feet is from here to Superior Court. So you can see the distance of that. The second thing is, this issue was brought up by the Guam Hotel and Restaurant Association. They didn't want the emissions to be over the hotels. The question was, what would their particulate level and sulfur dioxide level be? So we showed the SRA that really today, when the wind is blowing inland, they have a certain level of emission at Tumon Bay itself. With the new power plant, because it is burning ultra-low sulfur diesel, which is considered the cleanest fuel together with natural gas by US EPA, the emission with the new power plant at Tumon Bay is 10 times to 100 times cleaner than it is today. So that answered their question, and they understood the difference, because this power plant, again, it burns ultra low sulfur diesel similar to what is burned in the trucks, the other vehicles here, except that it's more efficient. The power plant is more efficient, therefore even emissions are less and all of that. So in terms of reliability, people wanted to stay next to the hospital because the power is always on. This is what we're going to work with GRMC, make sure we provide them a solid line to their facility, because they can operate themselves without, it's always it's always good to have reliable power for the area. So I can understand their concern, and I can assure them that we'll do everything possible to take care of that. And their other concerns was terrorism, and of course, Having this plan with the buffer and everything allows us an opportunity to make sure that it's well protected, not like our others. Other thing, tsunamis. Really, we all 80%, all our baseload units are subjected to tsunamis. This power plant, you know, where the lifeblood of the island is going to help get away from that situation and typhoon proof and all of that. So, yeah, we'll continue to work with them. I know it's not an easy scenario, but really power plants and hospitals and communities are contiguous to each other in many, many areas. We just showed them one, or, you know. Thank you.
Senator Munya.
Thank you, Mr. Beneventi, and everyone for being here today. And maybe you might have answered this question already, but it may not be fair to compare the Cabras power plant to what's going to be built here because of the wear and tear and the age of it, but just driving down that road, it really is and has become such an eyesore just for people driving through that area. So I'm just not knowing how to base the mass of the land on the map, but will the power plant be visible from Marine Corps Drive? I mean, cosmetically, will they be able to see it off of the road if they're driving by?
I don't think so. You probably see the stack, but you're going to have still a buffer of greenery, and then the power plant within that, and so
Okay.
it won't be no. And even within that compound, it is going to be aesthetically nice. It's not going to be just like what you see at
I imagine it
Cabras.
would be more
Yeah.
modern, of course,
Yes.
than new. So
And much more compact, actually, than the steam plant. Cabras power plant is really the most efficient at its time, but it's also it's a steam power plant. It's not like the plants that we're looking at now will be similar to like the diesel generators you have in facilities, or it could be a combined cycle which uses, I'm sorry, not to be too technical, a combustion turbine, which is the one that runs on the airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
So they're much more compact, much more efficient, and much less noisy, and not
so
like
it'll take up a lot less space then.
not the space. And then we can put it within, again, aesthetically nice building, and to protect it from the typhoon, but make sure that we make it aesthetically nice. The
I guess my
Cabras-
only concern
yeah.
is because it's so heavily trafficked,
Yeah. That-
area by the tourists, and
Yeah.
that would be my only concern.
I'd like to add that we do have some thoughts, like to maybe how the Cabras 1, 2, 3, and 4 site down there is actually, we want to clean that all up one day, and when we clean up that area, I'm just sharing a vision. If you look at that area, what do you think it could be? It would actually be a nice marina. Where Cabras 1, 2, and 3. Remember, that's the edge of all the way you go. You know, the submarine people,
Yes.
marina and all of that, boardwalk and everything. So we can, on the other side of the equation, there is some value for that we can probably use to lease out or something, and use that to offset some of the rate in the revenue generating scenario. So, there is some offsetting things that could occur for the benefit really of the community.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, being from the north, I welcome the opportunity for better power up in the northern area. So thank you again for this.
Thank you.
Any other senator? Senator Lee, Senator Uggan, then Senator Adda. Then Senator Morrison before Senator Adda. 4 of you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much to all of you for being here to answer our questions. I share some of the same concerns that was raised by a previous speaker about air quality, and so I'm really glad that I was able to attend the informational briefing that was held in February and that we had an opportunity to kind of go back and forth. I believe Senator Nelson also had questions at that hearing, and we were able to get a lot of our questions answered with regard to the air quality and how this might even be more beneficial. That we're updating, we're having a new facility so that you know will reduce some of the concerns about air quality, even if it's, I guess, the air quality of the existing Cabras power plant is pretty poor by today's standards, and so by building a new power plant, new generation, that might help with some of the air quality issues, and as well as the efficiency because it's closer to where the load is being generated and those types of things. One of the questions that was also asked in Senator Atta's Friday hearing in February was concerns about the aquifer. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of expound on that and what your thoughts are about potential water contamination because of this new plant.
Okay, you're correct. The aquifer, there's the main aquifer, which I think in the map shows where all those water wells are on the right, and where the residential areas are. Then there's the outside of the aquifer where water is already flowing out towards the sea. So we're on top of that. So really, as Dr. Jensen had mentioned, if there is some leakage for fuel or anything like that, the flow will be outward and not into the aquifer. So therefore, he was very comfortable in stating that it was safe for us to be there. In addition to that, the power plant really is, the fuel storage tanks are constructed with dikes, concrete dikes and all of that to make sure that if any leak occurs, it is contained within a dike. So that specifically would be ensured. Another again, you know, you can never say 100% that it won't happen, but I believe we've done, you know, we'll do everything we could to make sure it doesn't happen. And we really haven't, from my years here, I've not seen the ruptures of any of our tanks, you know, over decades of time. So, and technology is constantly improving. So again, for sure, this one we're going to make sure in the bid specs that, you know, it's really protected. So I would say there's always that perceived risk there, but the risk really, I think, is minimal from what I can see. You know.
Thank you. In your presentation on page 38, that was presented to us in the informational briefing to Senator Nelson, there were questions asked about why we should build a new power plant in Okkad. Some of the points were increased reliability, environmental benefits, and it'll be compatible with surrounding land uses. One of the bullet points describes diverting 3 million gallons of daily treated sewer water for plant cooling. And then the second bullet is that it doesn't have an impact to the aquifer. So if you could just maybe reiterate this point about the diversion of the 3 million gallons?
Yes, we're going to use the wastewater that is currently being treated by the Northern Wastewater Treatment Plant. Normally, after treatment, it will go straight out to the ocean. We're going to take 3 million of that water and use that for the cooling of the power plant. And then, in addition to that, there will be a net 30 to 50 million really gallons a year of water that we currently use in our Cabras 1 and 2 units, which will be retired once the new power plant comes on. So there will be a net positive to the aquifer. And again, that's 36 million gallons a year. This makes it more sustainable for us, right?
Thank you very much. Also contained in the presentation was points that you had reiterated about why about site selection and why Okkad was the best location for this proposed plant. You talked about access to 115 kV system, tsunami and storm surge risks, environmental permitting, which we all agree is extremely important. One of my questions then, and I just want for the benefit of the body, how long did the CCU and GPA take to analyze and consider all these options? Is this something that took a few months, and who was involved? Who else was involved in that process?
Actually, GPA puts together an integrated resource plan that looks out 20 years as to how we're going to serve the energy needs of our projected demand of the people of Guam. So and again, that IRP really came together around 2012, 2013. And subsequent to that, the PUC noted that we should come with what are we going to do moving forward. So in 2014, the CCU approved the construction of a new 180 megawatt power plant, which again up in the Okkad area for the many reasons you mentioned earlier, which is again the location, right into underground line, improve the reliability for the load center, where 60% of our customers are coming out from that area. We're going to save about again the 1.5 million a year in line losses. We're going to remove the transmission line that goes up through the mountain from Cabras all the way, the monotube that comes through Sinahanya. That's been there now for 30, 40 years. Those will all become coming out because they're going to need more reinvestment. But because we're putting now the power plant up in Okkad, we don't need to come through that mountain. Case in point here, Puerto Rico had a problem in the after the typhoon. Why was that? All their power plants were down here in the south, and all their load was in San Juan, which is in the other side of the island. When all the transmission lines came down, they couldn't have power for many, many, many months. So basically, this kind of a similar scenario where we are today, but now with the new power plant right at the load center, we're going to remove all these transmission lines. So it's going to improve the reliability of the islands substantially. So again, all the points mentioned, the aquifer, the use of the gray water, removal of the 115, being able to run through a storm, the recovery after a storm with all of this really makes this plan. So again, I'm getting deviating, but your question was 2014, the CCU approved it, and after 2 years of review, and of course subsequent to the explosion of the Cabbage 3 and 4, the PUC approved it in October 2016. And after they approved it, that's when we start the process of going looking for the land in February 2017. Took us 14 months to get to this point, and again, we're trying to get the power plant constructed, groundbreaking by the end of this year.
Thank you very much, and I think that reiterates some of the discussion that was had by the author of this bill and others in the body, that this has gone through a lot of public input. There was some stipulations about who in the neighboring area needed to be contacted, and you have gone above and beyond that, really kind of expanding that radius to make sure that many of the neighbors were informed, and then also this decision by our body and in an attempt to be very transparent with the public about what's going on. I know that in your presentation you also you talked about the benefits, you talked about the savings, and that ultimately this site selection would result in the greatest value for the people of Guam. And your estimate is that it would save, the selected location would save ratepayers over $80 million over the course of the building of this plant. And then I know that there was also some discussion by CCU members and other proponents of this bill that this would likely be the very last ultra-low sulfur diesel plant, and that we would be moving to renewables and other cleaner, greener methods of producing power. Do you concur?
I agree. Yeah, that's where we're heading. But it's kind of the base. The one thing I did note is that the base loads of today were constructed a long time ago, and they were not. When you construct base load back then, you just bring them up and you just let them sit there all day. But with renewables in the daytime, they're generating, and we have to shut down the base load units. So that's why the new power plant can be turned on, turned off, and several times a day, and allows us to match the load. So that's the way we're going to get more renewables. So
Thank
yes,
you.
I concur. Yeah.
There were a number of concerns that were brought up by my colleagues about air quality, about some of the concerns that were raised by the neighbors, issues about the aquifer. Were there any other major concerns that came up during this process when you were you had public scoping meetings or public input? What would you say were maybe the top two major concerns of the people who were opposing this?
Well, one other concern was mentioned, I guess, whether it will degrade the value of the properties around the area. But, this really, for example, we pointed out like the Machiachi power plant. That's close to residents, it's close to a lot of other things, but we didn't really, although we didn't do a scientific research, we didn't see that happening. And to me, I believe because the area is all M1 and all of those, I think those are types of facilities that are energy intensive. So therefore, having the power plant right there should be a benefit really to them instead of negatively. So markets are markets. I don't have anything scientific to show me that, but I can just say that, we're going to be a good neighbor by not being like, what is a typical power plant, so that we can add value to the place. No?
Are there any noise pollution factors that you anticipate?
No, we're going to meet all noise standards, and actually we're going to even go above that standard to make sure that, that this power plant is a very good neighbor. No?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Morrison and then Senator Atta. Pass. Oh, okay. Senator Atta.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make some amendments, but before I do an amendment. But before I do that, I just need Mr. Beneventi, in addition to constructing the power plant there, I presume you're going to construct other support facilities, a water tank, fuel storage tank, and whatever else. Is that correct? That's correct. Okay. And then now you're paying approximately what, 10-something million dollars. That's the price tag on that property, correct?
That's correct. It's about $45 a square meter.
Right.
Yeah.
Now there is that possibility that the contract for the construction of a new power plant to tie into that substation might possibly be constructed or located in an area away from this piece of property. And so if that is the case, and that in that scenario, that offer would still be competitive, then GPA is going to end up with 60 acres of property, right, and have $10 million tied up in it. And so earlier I had asked about the possibility that in that scenario, if the selected independent power producer does not require those 3 lots, the 60 acres, that then that selected IPP must purchase set lots from the GPA, correct? So, Mr. Chairman, I want to, if you could pass out the amendment, please. I would like to make an amendment to Section 2. So, in this amendment that's being passed around, and I'll just wait until Sergeant at Arms gets it passed out. So the amendment that I am proposing here is on the 7th line down. It reads, well, on the 6th line it says, allow for the, where we're going to rezone to allow for the construction and operation of a power generation plant and support facilities. That word support and support facilities is not in the bill that we're discussing. And then support facilities solely on behalf of Guam Power Authority or its successor, period. And then I want to add at the end of that paragraph the sentence, should the selected independent power producer not require subject lots, the IPP shall purchase the lots from GPA for the amount GPA paid to acquire the lots, and the rezoning shall revert to R2. So basically, what we're doing is we are rezoning this property with the understanding that GPA, for the scenario that GPA is going to build a power plant there. But there's a competitor. You seem perplexed.
No, go ahead.
Okay, and so the amendment's being made because in the bid process there is a competitor who's in the running, who's basically suggesting that he can provide the power that GPA wants at a competitive price. And so then, you know, if that bidder should be awarded, then GPA is left holding this 60-acre piece of property worth $10 million that we're not sure what we're going to do with. So that's my amendment, Mr. Chairman.
On the amendment, Speaker Cruz, you are recognized.
Madam Chair, I have no problem with most of it, except for the last 4 lines of the rezoning shall revert. It's going to come strange for me because I had been fighting against the rezoning in this area. But it just seems unfair if GPA is going to buy this property at M2 prices, and the IPP is going to buy this property from them at the $10 million because it is going to be M1, and we revert it back to R2, its value would be greatly diminished if it can't have the M1 designation. And besides that, as you can see from the map that the legislature approved the zoning, this whole area on this side is M and commercial. To take it all the way back to R2 would do what we have back on Hamburger Road, which just guiles me. That you have apartments next to plants, next to everything else. If you're going to despoil this side and have this M1 and commercial, then keep it all that way and don't put any R2s in there. There's no need to have residentials next to everything else. And the concerns that everybody else had earlier about the property, if you're buying in this area, you know, and I've now learned that we were the ones that rezoned this, everybody that bought knew that the land that they were buying was right next to M1 and M2 properties. They can't really complain about the fact that there's anything else that going to be there, because they had noticed that everything around them was M1 and M2 or commercial. So I support the amendment except for the reversion. I just don't think that that's necessary or proper.
On the amendment, Senator San Augustine, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Simple question, John B. Do you guys own the property already? No. Your intent is to purchase it.
Yeah, we have a retainer on it until we get all these approvals. And then once we get it approved, then we pay for it. And
So on your plan, if this bill passes, there's going to be a plant built there. Am I correct? I mean, that is really what your whole plan is. I mean, I don't believe you're going through this whole process to have somebody come in and say, we don't need this property. After you're ready, you put money in it. I mean, I wouldn't understand it. Because I wouldn't agree to you to pass this bill and then turn around and say, well, we want to sell it now. Why did you ask for the rezoning? You shouldn't have bought it to begin with.
I think there was some concern that if we buy this land and there was an alternative provided by someone else, which is not in this property, then GPA will be left holding the bag of $10 million. So how do we get that money back? We have them actually pay us back, and then, you know, one way or the other, we're going to get charged for that down the road, right? But the likelihood of that happening is not, as much as we open it up to everyone, they really still have to meet certain specifications and standards. They have to meet reliability standards. They cannot, to make the evaluation of all these power proponents, proposals be an apple-to-apple comparison, then they have to provide the same levels of reliability and all of that we're asking that this land provides us. And if they can do that, and their price is lower, which again, I won't speculate. We'll just let the process make it happen. Then so be it. But you know, it's not likely that that's going to be the case. But so that's why this issue has come up. Looking ahead, I think that land is gonna be used. No,
it's gonna be used for a plant. I mean, because if you say that today,
yeah,
that there's a good chance you won't use the area for a plant,
yeah,
then I don't need to support this bill then. I mean, because I want to support it for your plant. Because I live in the north, and it'll help the people in the north and everybody else.
Yeah.
But I just don't want us to say it's a good bill for GPA to build a power plant. Supports the military buildup, supports everybody up north, reduces your costs. You know, you sold the bill to me today, okay? And we're gonna say, well, in case you don't need it, then why even change the zoning then? I'm trying to understand that, and I just want to be comfortable that it's because GPA is gonna build a plant, and that's why I'm supporting this.
I myself personally am comfortable that we're going to use that land.
Okay, thank you.
From as far as I can see it, but again, I'm not 100% though. 99.99.
Well, I'm comfortable when you say 99 because that 0.9, yeah, 0.1 is not going to happen probably.
Yeah, it's not you know, and knowing what I know and seeing what I've seen. To get, you know, they have to provide the same level of reliability, because that's what you're correct. We sold this project on what needs to be done. So as long, you know, their thoughts about maybe renewables might make it, no, which is fine, but we're not going to exclude it. If someone has an idea and one can provide the levels of reliability, then we'll let them be able to participate.
Right.
But, you know, but again, you know, they have to, the proof of burden and reliability now comes from their side.
Okay.
And that requires, in my opinion, a lot of technical evaluations to prove that. But as long as they can do it, there is the policy call of actually the PUC wanted to open this up more as one, and so we agreed that, again, we'll proceed on that basis.
And the only reason why I'm anticipating is that if you don't use it as a power plant, you'll probably use it as a solar field, you know what I mean? But it's going to be a means of generating power for the people of Guam. That's what I wanted to make sure that it's understood.
You're correct. Potentially, you can put about 20 megawatts there of solar PV. That's right.
Okay, and it could actually expand more if the plant is not there. You can just actually do 60 acres of solar panels.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, thank you.
On the amendment, Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just so that we're clear, we're adding in, should the selected independent power producer not require subject lots, the IPP shall purchase said lots from GPA for the amount GPA paid to acquire the lots, and the rezoning shall revert to R2. So just a question, because several things. The first thing, the question that I have is it GPA's intent to purchase all these lots up front for $10.8 million?
Correct.
Yes. Okay. The $10.8 million comes from where?
10.8 million is going to come from settlement money for cabins 3 and 4.
Okay. And the settlement money comes from the insurance.
Correct.
And the insurance that you'll be receiving, what was being paid for the insurance was the taxpayers' dollars, right?
Ratepayers.
Through the rates, through the ratepayers' dollars.
Yep.
Okay. So now we're going to dedicate $10.8 million to purchase everything, the whole lot. Then if the IPP says, I only need half of it, we're going to sell it to him for the market value that GPA purchased it for. Half of the lot. And then the other half is going to be rezoned back to R2. So you paid $10.8 million for M1 zoning.
Yeah.
You're going to sell them half of the lot, and then the other half's going to be reverted back to R2, which means whoever you purchased this property from, you purchased it at a higher rate, and then you're moving it down to a residential zoning, which is lesser. So then,
I think
am I understanding this amendment properly? That
Madam Chair, may I?
Yeah, please.
Okay, Senator Ada, did you wish to ask this
yes,
to you?
I think it requires clarification, because it's understood that we're rezoning this whole property and we're looking to purchase it for $10.8 million from landowners, private landowners. And then now what's being added in the mix is if the IPP only needs half of that property, so how many acres? Let's just say it's, I forget how many
60.
acres. 60 acres. So if they only need 30 acres,
Yep.
you already purchased the property for $10.8 million, all 60 acres, no?
Right.
And so if they only need 30 acres, so let's just say what's $5.4 million, you're going to sell it to the IPP for fair market value. Then the other 30 acres, you're going to rezone back down to R2, but you already invested $5.4 million for something that was at an M1 rezoning, which is naturally, in real estate terms, it costs more to purchase M1 versus residential, no?
I think it's a little.
So maybe, I don't know
What,
what we
what
could
this
do.
is, I think what this was trying to say was the intention, the purchasing of the property is for the IPP to build there. But if the successful IPP bidder is somewhere else other than this site, then the property, then this property will be purchased by that successful bidder and put as part of their package. I think that's what they're right. So that GPA can still be made whole in terms of
The $10.8 million
$10.8
you purchased the
million.
property for.
Yeah.
Senator,
think
do
that's
you
what
wish
it's
that the
meant.
sponsor yield to the question? He'd
Yes,
like
that
to
would
answer.
help too.
Yes,
Thank
please,
you.
Senator
Thank you,
Ada.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So that amendment was being put in, and recognizing that, you know, the probability, there's a 99% probability that the power plant that's to be constructed is going to be constructed on this property. But we also know, based on the offerers, the prospective offerers that have submitted their technical qualifications, that there's an offer there that if he prevails, will not need this property. Putting this thing in the bigger context, we're basically saying, well, what if that 1% in fact does come true? Then if we don't put this provision in, GPA will be left, we're going to have this $10 million piece of real estate sitting there, not sure what to do. On the other hand, I think maybe we could withdraw this amendment and cross that bridge when we get to it. Because right now the bottom line is we've got to be able to build a power plant on there, and we do that by rezoning and allowing for the construction. So with that, Madam Chairman, I would like to withdraw the amendment.
All right. Is there any objection to withdrawing the amendment? No objections. Amendment withdrawn. On the bill, Senator Muña, or I'm sorry, Senator Nelson, you had the floor. Did you? You had the floor? So that was on the amendment. I guess you had the floor, Senator Ada. You were making an amendment. Did you still want to speak on the bill?
Well, no, I'm just withdrawing the amendment.
Okay.
Otherwise,
all right. So we're back on the bill. Senator Muña, did you wish to speak on the bill? Senator Uggan, on the bill.
Mine was just on the amendment, so.
All right.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Speaker. I just have a couple of questions. I know that it was stated a little earlier, Mr. Benavente, in regards to situating a power plant in the most heavily populated village in our island community. And one of the biggest concerns that have been shared by a number of residents, and I understand that there were a couple of public hearings conducted on this particular issue. How can you relay to the community that, in fact, whatever proposed power plant that will be situated in that parcel of property, that it would be relatively safe for our residents?
Thank you, Senator. Good question. First and foremost, really, the power plant has to be very safe, because really our employees are going to be working on these plants, right? And the plants actually are much more simpler technology, even, and it's not really anywhere comparable to the Cabers 3 and 4 that ended up. Secondly, it's again, having ourselves with the 30-acre buffer around the power plant assures a lot of things. One, security. Secondly, anything that happens in that plant is really, that's a lot, you know, usually it's just contained within that area of the facility. All the other issues about emission, noise, all of those are really something that we will address, and actually we'll have to get all the permits necessary from all the local entities, including US EPA and Guam EPA and anything that has to do like storage tanks. We have to get again, all those approvals and stuff.
So based on your statements, you highlighted it's relatively safe because their employees would have to be employed or working in these facilities, and I would think that the Cabras units are relatively safe. And fortunately, during the 2 incidents with Cabras 2, 3, and 4, that in that particular situation, your personnel were not injured. So, you know where I'm going with this train of thought, is that in spite of the assurity that you have provided, there's always that possibility.
Yes.
And one way that you have alleviated at least some of the concerns is the 30-acre buffer that will be surrounding whatever facility is constructed there. But then again, that's during your tenure. What if, in fact, down the road, future administrators or general managers of GPA decide that that buffer is no longer necessary, and then begins to expand and to utilize those particular parcels of property? Those are really the safety concern where a power plant would be situated has been the biggest issue that has been brought to my attention with regards to this. It's not the rezoning of the property, it's not other M1 authorized uses, but it's the construction of a power plant. I know you mentioned the emissions and the noise as issues that have to be mitigated as part of the contract. Now, I have you know when Cabras 3 and 4 went down, and you just shared with the members of the body that the $10.8 million is going to originate from some of the insurance that is being paid as a result of coverage for Cabras 3 and 4. So, are these funds presently within GPA, or it's still pending receipt?
It is within GPA.
And how long have you had these funds?
We've had advance payments from this, and again, settlements have occurred. And so, again, the other key part of this is that the bond indentures requires us to put this money back into the system. That's why the land, the infrastructure up there, the transmission line, the pipeline, that's what we plan to spend this money on. As mentioned as mentioned even in our presentations of how to keep the base rates from not rising, no?
Okay, I understand about some of the bond indentures, the requirements in terms of settlements, that these funds have to be utilized for capital investments. Now, prior to this incident occurring, and prior to receiving any of the settlements, I'm sure that you had some funds within GPA set aside specifically for capital improvement projects, possibly equivalent to the amount that you're going to expend in $10.8 million.
No, I think it's always been, when we were going forward with the what do you call it, the request for approval from the PUC, we showed them at that point that whether this amount of settlement from the insurance will go back into the fund. So it was always thought in that way. And then as time goes by, I know, and it's been in the financial audits, right? It shows that as time goes by, the insurance will give us so much money, so much money, so much money. So we had, $10 million that will cover that for the land,
Yeah.
which is part. So that's why
The
we're,
question, I guess the
you know,
question I have, Mr. B, is if you had sediment receipts of funds of in excess of $10.8 million that are going to be utilized for capital improvement projects, prior to the receipt of those funds, you already had operational or annualized revenues that are set aside specifically to meet some similar needs, capital investments, improvement of equipment, procurement of additional equipment. It really comes down to, my question is the ratepayers. Why is it that the $10.8+ million was not utilized to offset some of those reserves that were previously set aside so that at least our ratepayers can get some form of rate relief?
Senator, none of that money was set aside for any land issue. Every year we go through a budget process, and every year we set up our capital investment needs, which is the equipment, upgrades, land extension. So every year we spend around, it could be anywhere from 12 to 25 million. So that's you know, and none of that had any, we never set aside money on that for the land. We always understood as we looked ahead, as we tried to get approval, that there will be some insurance settlement, and that insurance, we understood that the bond indentures will require us to put that back into the structure, and so therefore the land, the pipelines and everything, there's going to be the 200 to 300 million for the power plant and itself and all its components, but the auxiliaries we were estimating will be costing close to 80 million, including the land. So that's where that 10 million came from. But the capital investment project, every year we set our budget based on what revenue we may be receiving.
And those are all
what our
revenues
needs.
from the rates, from the ratepayers?
Yes.
So
that's
every
under
year-
the current rates, no?
Yeah. So,
That's all.
so my question, my follow-on question then, if every year you set aside approximately 12 to 25 million dollars specifically for operational capital outlay and purchase of equipment and whatnot, that's where my question comes in. If you've had settlement funds sitting in an account that could have been utilized for some of those capital investments, then perhaps there would have been some rate relief for some of our people out there, in terms of making sure that it's still an authorized use of the settlement funds rather than what the ratepayers pay every day.
I think what we have said to the PUC and all of that is that if we're going to put a $300 million investment in the system now, the power plant is going to come on the line in 3 years. The concern was that there'll be massive rate increase in 3 years to pay for that new power plant. So what we're saying is that we're doing all these different savings, including insurance settlement, will be utilized so that when it comes 3 years from now, the rates will continue the way it is. So that's where the benefits is going to be to the ratepayers. We won't increase the rate after investing in the system $300 million. Instead of giving anything back today and then having a massive rate increase down the road, we've been working with that in mind, no?
It's just, Mr. B, knowing and understanding that you've had settlement money that could have otherwise been utilized for operational capital outlay to offset any rate increase, because there was a GPA rate increase in February. Our consumers out there, our ratepayers, absorbed a rate increase in February, and there's an anticipated rate increase of another 11 to 15% in May. So it was 15%, if I'm not mistaken, in February, and another 11 to 17% in May. And that could have been alleviated to some extent to relieve some of the pressure from our ratepayers. And yes, you're gonna explain that that's from the $17 million of the LEAC, in fact, because I understand exactly where these proposed rates originate from, but I'm looking at the ratepayers, and I'm just saying that the cost of electricity at this point in time, some of these resources could have been utilized to offset.
No.
Mr. Speaker, Then my follow-on question then, Mr. Speaker.
This is on the.
No, I'm referring now to
So I know, but
the
this is
amendment.
not an oversight hearings. Let's
I
just do the
understand.
grade.
But, Mr. Speaker, this proposal would authorize the expenditure of $10.8 million of settlement money that, in my opinion, could have been utilized to offset capital outlay annualized so that our ratepayers don't have to absorb another increase in May. That's what we're talking about right here. So if, in fact, that's an allowable crossover expense, then the people of Guam and the ratepayers will not have to absorb that additional 11 to 15% in May, which is just around the corner. That's what I'm asking, Mr. Speaker. And it's not an oversight question, it's an expenditure and an investment on the part of the ratepayers and GPA of $10.8 million to procure this property. But on the amendment, Mr. Speaker, if I may, Mr. B, has the RFP for the IPP been released?
Yes, no, invitation for bid, not RFP.
Okay, so the invitation for bid has been released for the IFP, or the IPP. So are we...
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Are we on an amendment or are we discussing a bill?
I'm sorry, if you take a look at the last two sentences of the amendment, yeah.
It was withdrawn.
Oh, it was? I apologize, I was in the back room. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But I did share that concern, Mr. Speaker, and
Okay.
I hope you were following my train of thought, because it really comes down to the ratepayers.
Yes, let's move on, please.
Thank you, Mr. B.
On the main motion. On the main motion? Yes. Otherwise, Senator Addy, you're welcome to, yeah. No, it's, if you wish to have the floor, you're recognized, Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill does three things. One, the legislature will consolidate 3 lots. It will rezone the 3 lots from R2 to M1. And third, it says it will allow for the construction and operation of a power generation plant solely on behalf of the GPA or its successor. So if you don't mind, Mr. Benavente, I'd just like to ask, why does the legislature need to consolidate the lots? I mean, isn't that something that could be done? Why does that need to be done?
If I may, Vice Speaker, we're consolidating the lots so that we could use all 60 acres as part of the master plan.
And not set aside easements, is that the reason? Are we trying to get around easement requirements in the different lots? So what is it?
No, if you look at the if you look at the map and you look at where the lot lines are, we have 3 lots.
Right.
And so we intend to use all 60 acres. So when we want to build the plant and its accessories, we want to be able to adequately plan it so that we have a total of 30 acres around as a buffer. We won't be able to do that if we're trying to build one single power plant, all of its accessories on 3 separate and distinct lots.
All right, I guess I wish Department of Land Management was here, because I think there must be a benefit to that legislative consolidation versus how you would do it normally if you had purchased these lots. If you didn't need legislative approval to purchase the lots, that's correct? Isn't that correct? You have authority to purchase the lots already.
Well,
you're not coming to us for that authority.
We're coming for the consolidation, and of course we need the 60 acres.
Yes.
And those are the 3 lots that make the 60 acres. So that's why we're asking for one sweeping consolidation and the rezoning so that we can construct the power plant.
Yes, I know you're going to use all 3 lots, so I'm just wondering about that word consolidation. I think it has implications. I'm suspecting it's to wipe out the easements that are required if you just for each individual lot. But all right, I'll move on then. And I wanted to ask, when we at the public hearing, the proposal was to rezone this to M2 and now it's to rezone it to M1. And do you believe that the construction of a power plant is allowed on an M1?
That is my understanding, but also you have to have zone variance, height variances.
Yes.
And all of that. So therefore, what's been done lately is really zoning it M1 and either what they've done in the past is public facility, but I guess M1 and authorization to put a power plant there, we're assuming will cover the height variances necessary for that.
Yes. Well, the difference between M2 and M1 that I could determine was M2 allows, but M1 has this restriction, other and conditional, that you would have to get a conditional use for other industrial uses not it allows as a conditional use other industrial uses not objectionable, obnoxious, or offensive by reason of odor, dust, smoke, noise, gas fumes, cinders, vibration, flashing lights, or water-carried waste. And under M2, those uses are actually allowed. And that was one of the things that was brought up by the Department of Land Management, that was a very dangerous use and that we should be very, very cautious in granting M2. So M1 says you're not supposed to have these types of objectionable odor, dust, gas fumes, and all of that. So that's why I'm asking, do you think that the power plant meets this criteria?
That's our understanding, right? Yep.
Yes, Vice Speaker. We believe that under M1, under the conditional use, if we were just looking at the zoning law itself, we believe that the power plant, the modern power plant, as we've specified today, with all of its environmental and clean uses, it does meet that conditional use under M1, specifically under utilities and public facilities.
So not under the other industrial use is not objectionable. It might not meet that, but it meets it under number B2, utilities and public facilities.
It could, and if you notice, there are several conditional uses for utilities and public facilities throughout the zoning law. In the zoning law itself, it actually doesn't state power plant and other large government facilities as well. So this body a few months ago, I believe, also decided to expand and rezone the Northern District wastewater treatment plant to public facility.
PF, that's right. That's my next question. So
Right.
why did you select? First, I want to assure the public. I agree with the concerns of the previous speaker regarding, the safety concerns. GPA tells us their plans, but we are making an exception here by rezoning. In a normal zoning process, you're going to have to go to land management, and if they find any concerns, they were going to make those as requirements or conditions of the rezoning. And we are not doing that here. We are rezoning pretty much blanketly, and then we are blanketly giving an authorization to build a power plant without really addressing what Department of Land Management and all the other agencies would have to firmly address, or perhaps put in as conditional, as their conditional approval of a rezoning. So I guess my next question is, why are you not requesting a PF? That was also one of the recommendations by the Department of Land Management that we are ignoring by this bill. He thinks it's more consistent to do what we just did for the wastewater treatment plant, the PF zone. So what's the difference between the PF and the M1 that you see? What's the benefit to GPA to zone M1 versus PF?
Well, we do believe that with the M1, as it was stated in the beginning of this hearing, that the M1 zoning is consistent with the Dos Montes planning map.
Yeah, but the waterworks treatment plant is in a similar area, isn't that correct?
Right. Well, we're going to leave that up to this body. We did believe that the M1 zoning is consistent.
All right, I'm just asking if you know what is the difference, because we are going against the recommendation of the department.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
Can I ask them to?
I'm asking the chairman for permission to respond. Because I was the one that put in.
Please.
So we chose, as the sponsor of the bill, I chose to put in M1 as a new rezone versus public facility because our interpretation of a public facility is a facility where the public congregates, such as the Dedido Sports Facility. Now, granted, we've had several other rezonings that came through which were PF, zoned as public facilities, but you know that I guess at the time we too did not understand that fine difference of what is a public facility. But I believe that in this case, rezoning the property to M1, consistent with the other zoning pattern in that area, is consistent, and that a public facility really is a facility where people congregate, notwithstanding the fact that the land management is recommending that.
Point of inquiry, Mr. Chairman, if I may raise a point of inquiry. So public facilities for a facility that's owned by the government as a public facility. This power plant, is this being owned by the Guam Power Authority?
That's correct. It's going to be owned by Guam. It's going to be really leased out with under the contract, but at the end of the 25 years,
But it's under a lease arrangement with a private owner, a private developer for the power plant.
Correct.
Yeah, and so that's why, Mr. Chairman, I think that if we're going to be looking at it from public facility versus M1, if we're going to be having a private developer build the plant and we're leasing it back from them, it technically wouldn't be a public facility until such time the lease was consummated and the property transferred ownership over to the agency. And so M1, in my opinion, would be more suitable if we're going to be looking at that kind of an arrangement versus a straight-up public facility label that technically wouldn't be satisfied until such time the lease was consummated, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. You still have the floor, Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask Mr. Benavente, GPA, if the plant, if the use of the plant will create what is described in the zoning law as an objectionable, obnoxious, or offensive by reason of odor, dust, smoke, noise, gas, fumes, cinders, vibration, flashing lights, or water-carried waste. The water treatment plant was not zoned M1, and I'm assuming it must not be able to meet this criteria, but is it do you believe it will meet this?
No, I don't think the plan will have those objectionable, obnoxious, offensive, reason of order. It does.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, we've heard discussion on this bill about the just the simple rezoning. If this was just a simple rezoning bill, I think there would be much less discussion on it. Mm-hmm. And because, as the speaker pointed out, there are many reasons to rezone from R2 to M1 if you want to be consistent. I looked through the testimony on the prior rezoning, but I can't see the reason that certain lots were left R2. And I note that, but if the, landowners actually testified that they're being taxed at the rate of M1 already, or they have been. Some of them at least for several years. So, right. So I can see how it would be fair to if we had by legislature rezoned much of the property surrounding to rezone other landowners who also want their lots rezoned. My concern with that is that we don't do that for all the property owners that are in that area. because I think this bill then leaves some in C, some in R2, and we're probably going to, I don't know, some of them might say that's not fair to them either, right? But, so it's not strictly a rezoning bill, right? Where we can just say, what's the best zone for these areas? And so I know that for GPA, that's not their interest to take care of the rezoning in all of the area, but that is our role here, and we are, you know, doing this this different route of rezoning, right, in here, the legislative rezoning. So I just think we should be the ones who have that as our part of our consideration. And I also wanted to ask, why GPA did not try, or did you try, to buy property that was already M1 zoned? Because when we look at the maps, like you said, there's so many M1 zoned properties next to the wastewater treatment plant, and between the wastewater treatment plant and the power, what do they call the power plant, or the distribution center that's along Route 1?
We did try in February 2017. We did, and there was actually one property that came in M1, and it was 40 acres. Unfortunately, it was within 1,500 feet of the Okkad school. So then we had to throw that out and redo the. After that, that's when we actually went to the Ancestral Land Commission asking. And then that didn't work either. And then we went out for another solicitation of interest. And this is when it came in as such.
Is that a GPA imposed criteria that it couldn't be within 1,500 feet of a school?
No, it's a public law.
That what, prohibits power plants from being within 1,500 feet of a school?
That's correct.
All right, because I know that you talked earlier about it being in 1,000 feet from the hospital, that new hospital facility? All right, but there's no restriction on that. So what is the current value of the property that you're trying to buy?
Well, we settled on the property for about $45 a square meter.
Is that
and then the other one that I think was coming in under M1 was about 75. So we're actually saving money by, by trying to get it ourselves to happen. So that
is it a condition of your purchase that you receive this M1 zone? I mean, that you can't purchase it? Is PUC requiring that you get the zoning before you complete the purchase?
PUC.
Because it looks like now you're saying, you're testifying that it's not going to affect the purchase price, whether we rezone it or not.
The purchase price is an agreement we made already for $10 million for the 10-point-something million for the 60 acres. That's the purchase price. We did put a retainer down that is subject to the land being rezoned and subject to the PUC approving. So if this gets rezoned here, we'll go march to the PUC, and hopefully that's approved in the month after that.
So the rezoning won't increase your purchase price, or
no.
You're purchasing it at the current market
That's
value?
correct.
Wow, okay. So I just wanted to, so then the third part of the bill, right, is to allow for the construction and operation of power generation plant. And so this is, I think, for me at least, the biggest concern, of course, right? We're by this bill, not just rezoning property consistent with other surrounding areas, we're now authorizing a use of it and we're bypassing the regular, conditional use. You go get a variance for that. And we're just by law authorizing the power plant. And actually what's going on is we really don't have the solicitation for the power plant out yet, so we don't really have, I very much appreciate GPA's presentation of the precautions that it's going to take and the safety that safety features that this new plant is going to have. But I think if it was a regular rezoning process, those would all be listed and be part of like a conditional or zoning based on these conditions, right? And so one of the recommendations again by Department of Land Management was that we the legislature require that GPA meet, above standard and really in meeting. And there are other recommendations by other agencies also that they say if this is going to go through them, that they would require all of these conditions before they would allow, they would approve it, right? And so I just want to point that out here, that by legislatively approving, we are not making any, well, this bill doesn't propose any conditions yet. I think GWA was even one of those agencies that pointed out that it would require, before it would approve, it would require certain things. And same thing, I think, Department of Ag, but GWA was even one of those, that they would require, they want to see the architectural and the engineering and how it's actually going to impact the flow of the water and things like that. And so, I'm just pointing out that they've made these contingencies, or they propose some contingencies for approval. Is there anything to prevent, if we just zoned the property M1 and stopped there and let GPA do its normal course of whether it's allowed to operate a power plant on these properties or not, and even if we even consolidate it and rezone to M1, is there anything to prevent GPA from going through the normal process of getting permission to operate a power plant in that M1 zoned property?
So it just takes a whole lot of time again. Secondly, the power plant still has to go through the permitting process. Mm-hmm. So all the permitters will have this opportunity when they start towards getting the building permit for the construction. So they do have a bite in the apple with this already. But it's really, we need to get, in the essence of time, trying to get this power plant built. That's why we've been trying our best to do concurrent issues, including the bid is out already, for the power plant. We're trying to do it concurrently because we're behind.
Understand. I totally understand the pressure that you are under. I just also hope you understand that we too were here just to represent the people of Guam, and there are 2 steps in the process. You're correct. Rezoning, and even with rezoning, that the regular rezoning, sometimes they put conditions on the rezoning, right? And then when you need to build on that property, they still might put additional conditions, right, on the use of it. So we're kind of, you might through your permitting process get some conditions, but I'm just saying we're foregoing that other opportunity for conditions at this point. But so I just want to point those out, that there are concerns that have been put on the record. I also want to point out that at the hearing, Professor Jensen Dr. Jensen from Weary testified, and I had asked him and then, he sent in a written letter, and then he also testified, but I asked him if he could put some of the things that he said verbally in writing, and we haven't received it, but I know we did receive from GWA, but did you receive anything in addition from Dr. Jensen or Weary?
No, Senator. I believe if my recollection is right, during that time, I think you asked for a letter from GWA. And
Yeah,
so,
I also asked, well, I asked, well, I just want to know, because he had testified at the hearing regarding, yeah, the perimeter of the useful parts of the waterlands and the non-useful parts of the waterlands, and I just wanted to know whether, if that was findings by Weary, if that could be applied to, yeah, other land uses in the area, and, you know, in addition to GPA, because that's the first time I have ever heard land use being allowed because it's over the non-useful part of the waterlands, or, you know, something like that. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but anyways, so I just asked that that be put in writing. But I do, yeah, we did get the letters from GWA and the other agencies, so thank you for that. All right, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On the main motion? On the main motion? If not, Senator Addy, you're welcome to close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think the good discussions have already been made, and there's really not much more to add to it. I want to thank GPA for being present and the information that they have provided over the months in moving this bill along. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I would like to move to rise from the committee of the whole with a recommendation to do pass.
On that motion, is there an objection? Hearing none, we are risen. The Guam Legislature is back in order. Senator Addy, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to report back to the body that Bill 223-34 was deliberated and rises with a recommendation to place Bill 223-34 into the third reading file and to do pass.
On that recommendation, there being no objection, it's in the voting file. Colleagues, it's 5 minutes to 5 at this point. Can we still have about 5 or 6 more bills? Do you want to deal with those now? I'm willing to stay. All right, why don't we continue then? I believe the next bill, Senator.
Can we go back to the set aside? Some of them just needed like 1 amendment.
Okay. Do you, get yours ready, otherwise I'll... While you're preparing it, I'll take Senator Rodriguez on his bill 241.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move to place Bill 241-34 on the third reading.
There being no objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this bill is very short. All it does is that it changes the word "and" to an "or." There was an oversight on our part when we passed this a few sessions ago, and it was an oversight on both, of course, in my office and the stakeholders who we were working on with this. And so, ask my colleagues to please support this measure, and it just changes the "and" or on Section A1 of this measure. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. On the main motion, 241. If not, Senator Rodriguez, you're welcome to close. On the motion to send Bill 241 down to the voting file, any objection? Where's Senator Nicholas? Senator Lee? Senator Nicholas, your bill is up. Bill 246.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker. If I may request the assistance of the Sergeant at Arms, I do have two items to circulate. The first is a substitute version of Bill 246 that includes certain changes that were raised during the public hearing, and as well as a, if I also may request the Sergeant at Arms to circulate an article that I'm going to be referencing in my statement with respect to Bill 246. So I'd like to first make a motion to have the body consider a substitute version of Bill 246-34.
On the motion to accept the substitute, all right.
Just for the edification of colleagues, for reference, the substitute version is starts on page 4, lines 15, and continues to page 3 on the subsequent page on page 5.
Do we still need additional time to review this? Okay. On the motion to accept the substitute, is there an objection?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bill 246-34 is an act to add a new subsection Q to Section 58104 of Article 1, Chapter 58, Title 12, Guam Code Annotated, relative to establishing a qualifying certificate for a business with at least $5 million in unrepatriated profits earned by at least one foreign subsidiary, which offers a 75% rebate for income tax paid to the government of Guam on repatriated or deemed repatriated profits. Mr. Speaker, if I may reference the article that was just handed out to my colleagues. It's titled, Bank of America, Massive Amounts of Overseas Cash Are About to Pour into the U.S. and Provide a Boost to the Dollar. Now this article, Mr. Speaker, goes on to speak about what is repatriate income and how that is an opportunity that we're seeking to take advantage of with respect to Bill 246-34. When the Trump tax reforms passed in December, they created a special tax rate for corporate income that was earned overseas. Corporate income that was earned overseas that was going to be brought back into the United States is now taxed at a special rate of 15.5%, which is a discount to its historical rate of about 37%, which is the standard corporate rate at the time. This discounted rate was intended to attract these foreign earned dollars back into the United States so that these companies can invest them in the U.S., pay out dividends, and basically spur more growth within the country. So the intent of the lower tax rate is to encourage more repatriation and to allow for these corporations to retain as much of that income as possible. With this bill, we're going to help that process along by offering a rebate of 75% of that 15.5% tax and retaining the remainder of it here in Guam. If we read the article, it starts out by mentioning several bullets. The U.S. saw less multinational repatriation than some expected in the first 3 months of 2018. Bank of America Merrill Lynch analysts expect a portion of the $3.5 trillion in corporate cash abroad to flow back into the U.S. over the coming quarters. The lag in repatriation in the first quarter could have been because companies were busy preparing. While sweeping changes to the tax system were widely expected to encourage multinational companies to bring cash back to the United States, the first fiscal quarter under the policy didn't see as much repatriation as some envisioned. But the tax law's effects are just getting started, according to analysts at Bank of America Merrill Lynch. They predict repatriation will pick up in the next 3 months and, in theory, boost the U.S. dollar. One of the most contrarian calls we have made this year is the U.S. profit repatriation flows following the recent tax reform will be bullish for the U.S. dollar, the analyst wrote in a note to clients on Thursday. U.S. companies have about $3.5 trillion accumulated profits abroad today, the analyst noted, and they expect up to 90% of companies they surveyed to repatriate at least part of that money. The analysts believe the GOP's new tax policies, which took effect in the beginning of the first quarter, could still help by removing a large penalty for repatriation. Under the tax legislation, multinationals have to make a one-off payment on profits socked away overseas, 15.5% on cash and 8% on illiquid investments. And after that, they can bring foreign profits home tax-free. The former tax policy levied a rate of 35% on repatriation. Apple, Apple, iPhone, iPad, Apple announced in January that it would bring about $252 billion of its offshore cash back to the U.S. But other multinationals have been slow to follow. And the dollar, which in theory should get a boost from repatriation, has shown it. The greenback posted its 5th straight quarterly loss in the first 3 months of 2018. Quote, we were optimistic early this year that markets would start pricing repatriation flows and this would support the U.S. dollar in quarter one, the analyst wrote. Clearly, this has not happened and the consensus remains strongly against our views. Still, analysts at Bank of America Merrill Lynch remain confident the second quarter will be different as corporations are more prepared to repatriate. Feedback from recent meetings with our corporate clients is that in general, they spent the first quarter getting the details on their total accumulated profits abroad and the currency and asset composition, the analyst added, and that means there could still be room for a strong dollar in 2018. Given the strong U.S. dollar rally following the 2005 Homestead Investment Act, we may see something similar as markets start appreciating the potential size of repatriation flows, both in the short term from the stock and the long term from the flow. Mr. Speaker, we can take away several things from this article. First, there's a lot of money out there. $3.5 trillion. Secondly, one of the largest single companies that are holding money overseas, Apple, is bringing back in $252 billion in cash. With this qualifying certificate, I took the liberty of breaking down exactly what that would mean if we were to pass this bill and avail ourselves of Apple's transaction. $252 billion at 15.5% tax rate would bring in about $39 billion in tax revenue. If we were to rebate 75% of that and retain 25% of that, Guam would realize $9.765 billion, just under $10 billion from facilitating that one transaction. Apple would save $30 billion in taxes. The result of that will be a boost to the US dollar and et cetera, as the article stated. And that's just one transaction. Of the $3.5 trillion, if we were to less out Apple's numbers, there would still be $3.25 trillion out there. Apple's $252 billion is only 7% of the total $3.5 trillion that's available. Guam has an incredible opportunity to be able to create a very attractive environment through which companies can repatriate their profits back into the United States save billions of tax liability on their end, while Guam enjoys hundreds of millions, if not billions, of tax revenue on our end. There were several concerns that were raised with respect to the bill. The first concern that was raised was whether or not the U.S. Treasury would allow for this transaction to take place. And in previous attempts by this government to try and capture tax revenue in a unique way, there have been instances where the U.S. Treasury has voided those transactions. But this particular transaction is very unique, Mr. Speaker, because this particular transaction, unlike those other transactions that Treasury was able to intercept, this transaction is specific to something that was congressionally authorized and upheld in the Ninth Circuit Court. The transactions that Treasury had a problem with were not transactions related specifically to corporate income tax rebates. And this bill specifically addresses corporate income tax rebates. Now, why is that important? It's stated in the findings and intent, Mr. Speaker, how corporate income tax is not only congressionally affirmed for rebate, but also protected with a court ruling. In our findings and intent, it reads, El Legislature Guam finds that the late Senator George M. Bamba introduced Bill number 167, which would establish the Guam Economic Development Authority and the Qualifying Certificate Program into the 8th Guam Legislature in 1965. Governor Manuel Guerrero, governor at the time, signed Bill number 167 and enacted Public Law 8-80 on July 23, 1965. El Legislature Guahan further finds that, as explained in Ramsey versus Chaco in 1977, quote, prior to amendment in 1968, however, the Organic Act also provided that all laws enacted by the Guam Legislature would be reported to Congress, and unless Congress acted to annul the law within 1 year, it was deemed to have congressional approval. The original law granting tax rebates was passed by the Guam Legislature and submitted to Congress while this pre-1968 version was still in effect, and Congress failed to annul the law within the 1 year period. In 1968, Section 19 of the Organic Act was amended to eliminate the provision of implied congressional approval in the absence of annulment within 1 year. Thereafter, in 1969, the present Rebate Act was passed, changing only the percentage of taxes rebated. The court concluded that Congress's failure to annul the original rebate bill within 1 year constituted an implied approval under former Section 19 of the Organic Act. Despite its possible conflict with the Organic Act, the original rebate law was implicitly ratified by Congress's inaction, and the Guam Legislature's later alteration of the specific rebate percentages did not give rise to a possible independent violation of the Organic Act and therefore did not require congressional approval. What does that all mean, Mr. Speaker? What it means is that this is outside of the realm of Treasury. Treasury, as an executive branch function, can only act within the confines of what the law authorizes. And if the law specifically authorizes corporate income tax rebates, then that is not something that Treasury can decide ad hoc to not honor. So we have it very clearly outlined how in 1968, the ability to offer corporate income tax rebates became federally recognized under the Organic Act as a result of that Section 19 in the Organic Act. And we further see how the courts, in their ruling, have affirmed that this is something we can do. So Treasury cannot just veto this action, and the need for us to get Treasury's approval for it, I think, is not something that is advisable, given the fact that this is already congressionally authorized and upheld by the courts. So what does that mean further, Madam Speaker? What it means is that the only way that this rebate can be taken away is by an act of Congress or a court ruling. Nothing from the executive branch can stop us from moving these transactions forward. And so in light of that, with this $3.5 trillion opportunity out there, billions of dollars on the table, and the opportunity for us here on Guam to capture that revenue with this bill, it affords us perhaps the single greatest opportunity for us to bring in dramatic amounts of money in a manner that is aligned with the federal policies that have been passed, or the Trump tax reforms, to encourage businesses to repatriate as much income as possible, and to allow for those businesses and that repatriation to further boost the dollar and increase those businesses' investments into the country. By helping them to save on their tax liability, we're going to help those companies accomplish that mission, and by retaining a smaller fraction of it, we will still be able to meet many of our financial needs. I wanted to address some of the items that are included in the substitute version that was discussed in the public hearing. We want to try to involve as many of our people as possible, and also to encourage as many participants to help us move these transactions forward. One of the amendments that we have in here was to allow for third-party agents licensed to do business on Guam to be authorized to facilitate these transactions on behalf of or as representatives to the repatriating companies, and to charge a fee of as much as 1%. We further allow, Mr. Speaker, to have any non-governmental entity handling the primary financial transactions. They have to be licensed to do business on Guam. We want to make sure that our Guam financial institutions are the ones handling these transactions. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, and perhaps most interestingly, we're trying to actually partner up with the actual local jurisdictions where these corporations are domiciled, or where they may have been domiciled. In that, if this is going to require congressional action to change, it may be in our best interest to actually win over the congressional jurisdictions of the companies that are going to be repatriating. And so Section 3 also further levies a surcharge on the repatriated income of 1% to be remitted to the Treasury of the state of domicile of which these corporations are in. So not only will Guam benefit from it, but also if the company's out of Seattle, if they're out of Washington State, if they're out of California, Silicon Valley, or if they're out of Texas, or whatever state they're out of, we will also be providing a percentage of the repatriated income directly to the treasuries of those states. So on the big picture, Mr. Speaker, this looks like a bill that's going to not only benefit Guam and benefit these companies, but benefit local principalities altogether. And it helps to make sure that as we encourage these repatriations to take place, as was the intent of the tax reform, that we're spreading the wealth out, and we're helping everybody to enjoy as much of the benefit as possible in bringing these offshore monies back into the United States of America. But what we want to do is we want to be the ones to handle the transaction. And so that's the win-win-win that we're proposing here at Bill 246-34. I humbly ask my colleagues to please consider supporting it. It could very well open the door for the Guam Economic Development Authority to really facilitate some of the most dramatic revenue opportunities that we've ever seen, and take full advantage of this ability to rebate corporate taxes that was a door that our forefathers opened all the way back to Governor Guerrero's time. I think that it would be just so fitting for us to be able to take that next step and really realize the benefits that they were able to secure for us. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. The clerks have asked that we take a 10-minute recess so they can, there's something about the taping that has to be done within a 3-hour period. So we'll just take a short recess and then we'll resume.